Hello my friends, this is Mr. Science Mover, and welcome back to Shmooving Out, where we'll be teaching you the shmovement of moving out. This second episode will cover the specific properties of each light object in the game. If you haven't watched our previous episode on boxes, I would highly recommend watching that first, as this episode will be building off of the knowledge obtained there. With that, let's get started. If you've watched our previous tutorial video, then you'll recognize these standard moving boxes immediately. These guys are your basic light object. They go a decent distance when thrown and tumble as you'd expect. The same is true for these open boxes, which you'll find mostly in the middle of the game, and these small pipes, which you'll find in the end of the game. Building off of these, we have some smaller objects. These objects travel a tiny bit further than your standard boxes, but most have something unique about them. We'll start with the cooler, which is the most basic of these smaller objects. It travels farther than a normal box, but does nothing else special. The same size and shape as the cooler, we have the microwave and its friend, the toaster. These two objects are attached to the wall by a cord, so you'll have to pull on them to get them to detach. One quirk about these cords is that when they snap, they apply a quick force to the object, and you as well if you're holding it. What that means is that you can use these cords to propel yourself or your objects in a certain direction. In fact, you can throw these objects before they're disconnected from the wall, and the momentum imparted by your throw will give it that extra push to snap the cord. Next up we have the computer. It acts similar to the microwave and the toaster, but it's a strange shape with a wide bottom and a small top. This may cause it to bounce off of things in an unexpected manner. It shouldn't give you much trouble, but it's something to keep in mind. Like the computer, the VHS player acts the same way, but is a bit longer and shorter in height. The last two objects that fit into this category are the game console and the radio. Despite being electronics, these are not plugged into the wall, but do act like a microwave of a different shape, the console being more of a flat plane and the radio being a thin rectangle. Next we have the cargo crate. This object behaves a lot like the other objects mentioned previously, with a square shape instead. However, these crates are often found on levels that contain other moving parts. These mechanics will be explained in a later video, but it's important to note about these boxes that it's easier to move them with your body than it is to move them while holding another box. These boxes tend to catch on corners and even each other pretty often, so be careful about running into things while holding one of them. After the basic small objects that tumble when they hit the ground, we'll move on to objects with special circumstances that will most likely affect your gameplay. The first of these is the fragile box. The fragile will break if it hits the floor or any other piece of the environment too hard. This is an important distinction from any object. In fact, the fragiles will not break if they either A. land in the truck, or B. hit another object that is to be delivered. In this case, the fragile will be perfectly fine. Use these to your advantage in levels like Poolside Pad or Jerry's Apartment. Next up are the chairs. There are a variety of chairs throughout the game, including a bar stool chair, a rolling chair, a folding chair, and a manor chair. All these chairs work about the same. They have a smaller throw distance than the standard box, but will tumble wildly in the air when you throw them. In line with the chairs, we have the living chair. This object only appears once in the level Dread Manor. It's very similar to a normal chair in that it can't be thrown very far, but it will always stay right side up and won't tumble at all. In this case, you want to make sure your throw is strong enough or close enough to reach the final destination. Another object that likes to stay standing upright is the luggage. This piece of furniture doesn't look very menacing, but if it ever happens to land on its top, it'll always fall over, even without any momentum. This is important to note on levels like Packmore River, where the exact position of the luggage is very important, and you don't want a thrown piece of luggage to roll away. Next we have the briefcase, the luggage's older brother. Being bigger and heavier than the luggage, the briefcase can't be thrown as far and tumbles more wildly in the air. That being said, the briefcase is less concerned about its position when it lands, but be careful to take note of its height, as even with a jump throw, it will tend to fall faster than you'd expect. The speaker is another object similar to the luggage that likes to stand upright and will never stand on its head. However, it has the weight and tumble of a briefcase, which makes the speaker a very volatile object to throw. Take care to not let it get away from you. Last in the line of objects with uneven weight dispersion, we have the basket. This object is very clear as to why it prefers to stand upright. However, take note that you'll often find baskets with food inside of them. These small pieces of food, while they cannot be picked up by you, will remain in the basket when you pick it up unless you shake them out manually. This changes the weight of the basket and may even shift it while being thrown, so make sure that your throw is strong enough or close enough to compensate for any extra weight inside. Alternatively, you can attempt to shake the food out for a standard basket throw. Up next, we have our spheres. Our basketballs, soccer balls, beach balls, and even knights' heads all act the same. Unfortunately, these objects do not act like they would in the real world, in that they experience very little friction. A ball rolling on the floor will roll almost indefinitely at that speed until it hits something. Make sure to consider this when throwing them into the truck, as unless they're blocked in, they will most likely roll out. Lastly, we have our silly one-offs. The keytar is a light object found in Lenny's mansion that acts much like a speaker, except that it's very long. Don't worry too much about it, as it prefers to stay on its side instead of its tip. Along the same lines, we have our hay bale, which only shows up for farm-themed sections of the game. It's never designated as a deliverable item, but is helpful for pushing buttons. It will always be picked up long ways, unless your arms get a little confused. It tends to feel a bit heavy when holding it, but will carry more momentum than you'd expect, so be steady with it when letting it go. Then we have our chickens, which are a lot like the living chairs. As for throwing them, they throw about as far as a box, but will never tumble. I'll go into more detail about the AI of the chickens when we get to the living creatures episode. And finally, we have our two good friends, the flamingo and the gnome. The flamingo is an interesting object, and is never required to be delivered, but is necessary for an objective in Jerry's apartment, so cherish your short time together. The gnome, on the other hand, is actually present in most levels, and is available for you to pick up freely. It's helpful in Jerry's apartment to jump through the window, and can also be helpful in the chase for pushing buttons for you. It's also required for an objective in that level, so get accustomed to your new friend, but be prepared to throw him off the train. Well, that was quite a lot of small objects. You should now be well equipped to take on any small object in the game and incorporate its nuances into your routing. Next week, we'll move one step up to what I like to call small but heavy objects. These are the kinds of things you can't throw explicitly, but they carry a whole lot of momentum. These include things like round tables, fridges, and of course, everyone's favorite, the arcade machine. Until next time, keep on schmooving.